everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today we are going to be talking about why everything in publishing, in traditional publishing, takes so freaking long. It takes forever. TradPub can be murder on those who aren't very good at patience or waiting, and I find that it tends to be the biggest shock to people when they kind of come into the industry, how long it takes between selling a book and actually seeing it on shelves. I mean, this is a shock to people outside the industry too. I mean, we've all had that situation where you tell a family member, like you might even just tell them you wrote a book, or you say I got an agent, or even that you got a book deal, and they're like, great, I'm gonna go to the bookstore next week and your book's gonna be there, right? And you're like, that's not how it works. But why does it take so freaking long? Well, I'm gonna talk about it. Now, an important disclaimer up front, all of this is from my perspective as an author and kind of what I have gleaned over 3 years, I have to think about that, what I've gleaned over 3 years, 2 different publishers and 3 books. So I've gone through this process. I'm now on the 3rd process with my book, The Ivies, which is my YA thriller coming out May 25th, 2021 from Crown Random House. And Crown Random House is my 2nd publisher. My first set of experiences on my first 2 books was with Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, HMH. Very similar processes at both, though. I mean, I'll talk about there's even more, it feels like there's more going on at Random House. I feel like there are more people involved in the book. You can feel that it is a much bigger publisher, and the bigger the publisher, there's more moving parts for sure. And I guess I could make a whole video kind of comparing the differences between my 2 experiences. If you're interested in hearing about that, definitely leave me a comment down below. I'll have to like noodle on that. There are specific parts of this process that have been super different this time around with a new publisher, but have really made me go, oh, that's why it takes so long. So we're going to dive into it. So first of all, one just very easy reason for this, traditional publishers, the average traditional publisher, like the big one, you can of course be TradPub by a smaller publisher, though they still tend to have long lead time. They're big. They're very big. They have a lot of departments, there's a lot of employees, and they publish a lot of books. So there's just a lot of moving parts. And you have to think about this in terms of what I will call multipliers. Every time you add another person to the mix, someone who has to touch a book, work on a book, and think about that for then all the dozens and dozens, in some case hundreds of books that a publisher is publishing, not even in a given year, but a given season. Publishers work by seasons. Some have 3, some have 4. So for example, Random House definitely has spring, summer, and winter. But at any given time, a large traditional publisher is working on a lot of things at any given time, and there's a ton of different people working on any given book. Now, this is one of the advantages of traditional publishing if you are considering pros and cons, in that a lot of people touch your book, and they touch it for you, so to speak. They are doing a ton of work that you're not even gonna see in a lot of cases. Some of it you will see, but having all those different people work on it to pass it through lots and lots of measures of quality control, essentially, multiple people reading it, copy editing, typesetting, proofreading, design, sales, marketing, publicity, all those people are touching your book. And every single time a new person, a new department gets involved, you have to add a time multiplier. And that's just inside the publisher. There's also variables outside the publisher, which I'm gonna talk about when I talk about the sales team and marketing and publicity. But every single time you add someone in, you gotta build in a little more time, because it's all about coordination, communication, because you're sending things to people, giving them time to do their job before you follow up, touch base, or receive it back. And there's just a lot of back and forth that comes into it. And you want to give things time and space as well. If you've ever had that situation where you write something, I mean, we're writers, you write something, you have noticed probably you're always gonna be fresher if you say wait 24 to 48 hours before you read something over. Or you might do an edit pass, but then wanna go over it one more time fresh. Your publisher and various people at the publisher are going to take those same steps of letting something sit for a day or 2 before they go in and look at it one last time. So this is good because you know that you are not alone in putting together your book, but because you are not alone, it's like you're on a big boat with a bunch of people and you can't steer the boat by yourself. You need everyone else to be rowing with you. The metaphor falls apart, but just like lots of moving parts, lots of people moving on the book, time multipliers. So what are all of those things? I am going to go through this in parts. I'm going to talk about editorial, book production, sales, and then marketing and publicity. And I'm gonna run through them in that order, and some of them have to happen before the next team can basically take the ball and run, but a ton of it actually does happen simultaneously. Like the last 6 to 9 months leading up to your book coming out is when they're really like everyone's working on things at the same time and a ton of stuff happens for your book. And I mean, just the most simplified explanation, bearing that in mind, the reason it takes so long for a book to be published is they need 6 to 9 months realistically to do the volume of their work, like the stuff that's like physically gonna put your book on the shelf. You, the author, need the time before that. It takes about 2 years from selling to get your book on shelves, sometimes a little less, but 2 years is very standard for you to do your job. You wouldn't want to be rushed in your part of the job, would you? Which is editing the book. You want to make sure the book sparkles. And once you've gone through those steps, you, for the most part, aren't going to be changing your book, not in any substantive way, in that kind of 6 to 9 months. Like once you get there, your book's locked in. So you want to have your time, don't you? So that then they can have their time too. That's the nutshell of why it takes 2 years. Now we're gonna go through it in detail. I'm basing this on my collective experiences, but the nitty-gritty of some of this is based on my current experiences with Random House, because there have been more steps with Random House specifically on this book. I'm actually really excited to talk about it because I geek out over this nitty-gritty stuff. I'm fascinated by like all the steps it takes to get a book to market, and I am learning and absorbing like a sponge with every step I take in publishing, and then I get to share it with you. So at any large publisher, a ton of people are going to end up touching your literal words, editorial, sometime throughout the editorial or the book production process. There are stages of editing that I've covered in other videos, but in a nutshell, developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, and then you get into pass pages, and this is final proofreading. It's almost like copy editing part 2, except you'll have done the bulk of the work. Ideally, you don't make a ton of changes in past pages because you've set the book, which I'm going to talk about. But there's like, it's like a second degree of copy editing because you're catching the same kind of errors that you were looking for in copy editing that your copy editor found for you with word usage, continuity, typos, etc. At HMH, I think at most 3 people in editorial, or 3 or 4, touched my book over the course of a certain amount of time, but at Random House it feels like it's double that. I have an official copy editor, but then there was definitely another person who did a pass on it, plus my main editor did a pass on it, and they don't always label their comments, which is why I can't always tell who's reading them, but my pass pages, multiple people who have gone over my past pages, not just my editor, not just my copy editor, like a ton of people are going over it over and over and over again. And as I said, the good thing with this is you have so many people there to catch you if you fall. They're there to find your stupid mistakes. We all make so many. And hopefully you end up with a book that is error-free or minimal of errors. But starting with your editor, you have to do your developmental edit. This is where you really dig in and you make content type of changes to the work. And this takes time because your editor has to read your book. They read it on submission, and usually they're going to read it again after they buy it, or if it's contract book, they're gonna read it, and possibly even again. My editor, before I got developmental edits on the Ivies, she read it on submission, then she read it on a first pass, and then she read it again. And I got a version this like really intense. I got an edit letter and a marked up version of the Word document. She combined dev and part of line. She did both at the same time, which was her style, but meaning she read my book 3 times before we did dev edits, and that takes time. She's very detail oriented. And so I sold in early November, I think, and I got my edits in mid-February. So that was about 2.5 months for my editor to do that critical part of her job. Then I had a few months to do my part, which was to do all of the edits. I ended up needing an extension, a minor one, but regardless, I got an extension, and we actually did a few micro rounds of dev and line after that first round. So that back and forth, we needed time for that. You don't want to rush your book. You want to put your best work into it. This is all before delivery and acceptance. Delivery and acceptance is when you're usually going to get your next payment, depending on your payment structure. But it also is like when your publisher says, we accept this manuscript editorially, and generally from that point on, you are simply not going to be able to make major edits. So you don't want to rush that. That's usually the first 6 to 9 months, sometimes up to a year, depending of the process of getting a book out. So as I mentioned, my editor combined dev and line, but very often editors don't. So you're gonna do line edits. You have to build in time for your editor to read your developmental edit and do line edits. Then you need time to complete your line edit. And sometimes you'll have multiple passes of line edits. They're going to be lesser each time, but just think about all that time that you're building in. Time for your editor to work, time for you to work. And don't forget that your editor is not just working on your book. They are juggling a lot of different priorities. They have other books that they're working on, either in the same kind of part of the process as yours or that are further along in the process. There's always something for them to do. They're managing a list. And so just, yeah, think about those multipliers. And the multipliers, there's the ones for your book, but also for all the other books. Then you go to copy edits. This is going to be a person who's not your regular editor, your core main editor, and they're going to copy edit your book. In my experience, that's been like a 3 to 4 wait, usually after DNA or line, and then you have to do your copy edits. And then that's going to vary depending on how intense they are. You usually, I have found, are going to be given like 2 weeks, but it can go up to a month. You need time to do those copy edits. Then we get into book production. So part of book production actually starts while you are doing your edits with your editor. You see how it's all happening at the same time? Because part of book production is your cover. Generally, any aspect of print and design needs a lot of lead time. It's really not something that you want to rush, and even publishers that publish on a faster timeline hopefully aren't rushing this, because it's very important in terms of typesetting, page design, cover design, jacket design, formatting, etc. Because it's not just your hardcover. They're going to also be formatting an ebook. In many cases, an audiobook is also being produced at the same time. And this is all book production, turning it into a real book. There's just a ton of formatting stuff, and I think authors really underestimate how awful that can be, how detail oriented it is. And like, think of it, you want them to be good at their jobs, you want them to take time with their jobs. It's a detail oriented job that should take a little more time, because if they mess up anything that you annotated or did in copy edits, in a worst case scenario, your book could be published that way, which wouldn't be good. Always read your past pages thoroughly, kids. Mistakes do happen. Or yeah, you just create more work for later. You want them to be good at their jobs. You want them to take time. And if you are self-publishing, by the way, this is why it's generally advisable to hire a professional to do this, so that they do all that lovely detail-oriented work for you. Someone's got to do it. And in traditional publishing, it's the job of a whole ass department at your publisher. I actually think there's multiple departments involved. So cover design, they're gonna start it pretty early because they gotta bring sales and marketing into that. They gotta do like brainstorming ideas. This happens at meetings, and at most publishers, there's 1 meeting a week. I heard some publishers, it's every other week. Some do multiple times a week, but you basically have to build in the wait time for, well, they have to go to a meeting, talk about things, everyone has to go off and do their job, then they're gonna meet again. And if you've ever worked in any kind of corporate culture, you know how things can get real dragged out when it's like, and we gotta meet, and then we gotta work, and then we gotta meet, and then we gotta work. Things can stretch so easily in any corporate work environment, media work environment, and the same thing happens in publishing. And so the same is going to go for your book design, actually. They are going to be meeting and talking and changing things like, oh, the fonts they want to use. Do they want to use a drop case? Do they want to do a cute little design on the chapter headings? Like, all of that stuff happens behind the scenes, and like, you don't really have much to do with it until they send you like a beautiful design and you're like, oh my gosh, well, that required time and effort. In my experience, to get to the first pass pages, which they've laid out your book and you're actually going to look at it, 4 to 6 weeks, but it can also take longer, sometimes like 12 weeks. It's really going to depend, but one day past pages are going to arrive. And so here's the thing. So they not only laid out your book the way that they want it to look when it's printed, but someone's already read through that. It's often multiple people have read through that. It's going to come to you with all sorts of marks on it, proofreader marks. The proofreaders have started reading it. And also in my case at Random House, not only did the proofreader read it, I saw notes from my copy editor and my editor in there. So that means at least 3 people read my first pass pages before it even came to me. So for me, there was a longer gap. So I'm imagining it takes them 4 to 6 weeks to actually lay out the book. But then they're gonna read over it multiple times and do multiple steps of the work before it comes to you. The author is last. So for me, we did copy, I think it was July, and I got my first pass pages in November. But by that point, they had gone over it multiple times. I was impressed, y'all. They do their jobs. And actually part of that's worth talking about why it can take so long, but also why you might have multiple rounds of pass pages. Again, it's gonna depend on your publisher and it's gonna depend on the book, but I'm just telling you how much work goes into it and why it takes so long. Remember your multipliers. Every time you give it to someone to read in a detail-oriented way, not reading for pleasure, it probably takes them at least a week to do that work. There's also all of this all these rules, like proofreading rules, and you have to mark it up in a very specific way. Copy edits are like that too. And so there's, again, it's just lots of detail-oriented work, and detail-oriented work takes time. So I want to talk about another aspect that takes time and involves different departments. You can have aspect in your book, it's going to depend on the book, where it's almost like multimedia. It's not plain text. I have multiple instances of this in the Ivy, and so a whole design team had to be involved, which is another department at the publisher, I'm pretty sure, because we have instances of text messages, Instagram DMs, I've got emails, and also the poor publisher, I was like, can you create a digital corkboard similar to Scrivener? I even screenshotted Scrivener and showed it to them because I had a character have something like that. Oh, there are Google Docs in my book as well. And my publisher decided to make them stylistically, create a style guide essentially, where each different kind of digital communication wouldn't just be plain text on the page. They wanted to make it look like the thing. So you gotta bring in the design team. You gotta make it look like text bubbles, though part of me is kind of like, they look like, this is me being nitpicky, and I actually didn't say anything, it doesn't matter. They look like iPhone messages, and my character doesn't have an iPhone, but I decided not to get into a whole realm of well, it could look like an Android. They would murder me. Anyway, they look like text messages. It's very cool. They had a special font and format for Instagram DMs. They did a whole, making something look like a Gmail email. There's all that cool stuff that they have to do, and they rarely nail it on the first pass because the team is converting from messages that came off of copy edits from your editor, they color code, and then there's all these rules I don't understand where they're like, let's do it this way. So that is why at least the Ivies has multiple passes. We did first pass pages in November, and then I just got second pass in last week, so it was mid-January, and it was another pass. Fine-tooth comb. I saw, again, at least 3 people went over it, including my editor. So again, which means they actually worked over the holidays, which we love them. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. It's detail-oriented, and you want them to do it because it's good for you in your book. Oh, which brings me to sales. Sales and publicity and marketing are going to kick off it's in the 9 months to a year out mark. Again, it's gonna vary by publisher, but this is when they do their jobs. This is the real final sprint. And remember, at this point, you've done your dev edits, often your line edits, sometimes your copy edits, but usually you haven't done pass pages when they start to do their jobs. Because the ARC will become available somewhere in there. Again, it varies by publishers. Some do them 4 months out, which means they were, all these other things happen before that. Some do them 6 months out, 9 months out, 12 months out, it varies. And some will do them just for the sales accounts. They'll have early ARC distribution for the sales accounts, that's pretty standard, and wait to do the consumer push later, because they're 2 different departments and they have 2 different uses. So your publisher has a sales team and their sole job is to get your book distributed. I mean, there are many core reasons to go with TradPub, but I think distribution and sales teams are the #1. They are very, very, very good at getting books out there. This is why the vast majority of books that you will find physically in bookstores and in special retailers, like the books you see at Costco, Target, Walmart, any given bookstore, that is traditional publishing doing their job. So they have an entire sales team, often regionally based. Like they will actually be locally based. Like let's say, I mean, Penguin Random House being such a large publisher, like I know they have regional sales reps. So they'll have someone whose territory is Georgia, whose territory is Northern California, Southern California. And pre-pandemic, a massive chunk of their job was actually in person. A ton of it was FaceTime. It's actually physically going to bookstores and bringing your ARCs and your catalog and like selling these books to booksellers. I mean, it's all virtual right now at this time, but the sales teams, I mean, sales is sales. Sales roles are all about relationships and networking. It's building bridges and relationships. So they know, oh, I really like my sales rep and I know that, you know, the publisher always has a really good catalog and we get really good, you know, sales off of their titles. The sales reps from publishers are able to offer sales incentives. They do all sorts of sales incentives to drive bookstores to order more copies of their books, of your books. And just depending on the publisher and the salesperson, you know, they'll have that clout to try to push you to the big box stores, for example. And so like, seriously, have you ever worked in any business of any kind of corporate job, or really anything that involves talking to other people, reaching out to other people, trying to facilitate a business relationship? Then you know how freaking long everything takes. It's just this process. You have to reach out, give them time, follow up, give them more time, do the sales pitch again, you know, and it's all ticking down to, there's always a timeline around which booksellers and such are going to be placing their orders. Librarians are going to be placing their orders. But they're constantly doing a ton of other things that they don't really think too much about summer 2021, for instance. That's my season, too far in advance. And yet it's still standard to give them that catalog far in advance because you want to build buzz. It's buzz building over a certain period of time. They're constantly focusing on the current season to sell, the previous seasons that they're weeding, that they're doing returns on. It's this big machine and everyone's busy all the time. Everyone's overtaxed. I mean, it's certainly on the bookseller side, everyone's underpaid. And so there's just a lot of human courtesy that's involved, of being kind, of giving time, grace, so you build in long lead times for anything sales related. Things take forever. My day job is marketing, which is kind of adjacent to sales. We have a sales division of my company as well, and things take forever, y'all. Contracts take forever. Like, yeah, it's just a lot. God, I didn't even mention how long contract negotiation can take at various publishers, but that's neither here nor there. But it does contribute to some of the timeline stuff. But just like, remember, sales' job is to create excitement and build buzz for your book on the most practical end, to physically get your book into stores, to get the staff excited so they can hand sell your book, to get librarians excited so that they will add your book to their collection, and so on and so on and so on. It's just, it takes time. Which brings me to, last but certainly not least, marketing and publicity, who do so much invisible work behind the scenes that you're just never going to see, and apply the exact same principle to marketing and publicity as you do to sales. They just need time to do their jobs. They're juggling a million priorities. They're always simultaneously focusing on the current season as well as the upcoming season. It's just a lot of things to do, a lot of moving parts. And again, it's very relationship based. Like, you want your marketing and publicity person to know the right people, to understand these like critical timelines. Like, they know if I have 4 months to massage this relationship and this pitch, it might actually pull off. But if I go to them with only 8 weeks, they're just gonna say no as a matter of course, because they're just not gonna have the bandwidth. Marketing and publicity is just, it's all time and finesse and relationships and juggling a million different priorities all at once. And I'll tell you, in some areas of marketing and publicity, the lead time is bonkers. Like, if you're doing event planning, you need 18 months to 2 years realistically. In other industries, at least 90 days. It's gonna depend on the industry. So I'm honestly impressed that book publishing can do it in 6 to 9 months. And that is typically when they're going to start. They'll start behind the scenes stuff that you're not gonna see earlier, but like 6 months is really that sweet spot when they might actually communicate with you and you'll know what they're doing. But some publishers, honestly, like they'll have different strategy, and it's kind of, they don't really start till 2 months out, and then they have stuff planned for after the release, whereas others will like really do the 6 month to 9 month lead in. It's going to vary, but the point is they need time. And I just like want to point out that a lot of the things that you want or hope for that are related to marketing publicity, they really do need that time. So like trade reviews, you need to build in minimum 6 months. There are definitely cases where if an arc comes later, sometimes you're not gonna get a trade review, or you're gonna get late trade reviews. Like that needs a lot of lead time. Things like book boxes or book clubs, marketing needs a lot of time for that kind of thing, a huge lead time. It might not happen, but you still want to have good consideration and running for those big things that you dream of having from a marketing and publicity standpoint, pitching you for articles, all sorts of stuff. They just all require a lot of lead time, so we want to give the marketing department and publicity department that grace. So generally speaking, kind of wrapping up in conclusion, clearly I'm pro publishing taking forever, mostly because I accept the reality that I live in, but I have seen the pros and cons and the differences. Like a book can be rushed to market. We have seen it. My first book was crashed, and I will tell you, I saw the difference in like missing out on like that 3 to 6 month of buzz lead time in terms of sales and marketing and publicity. They got me very well distributed actually. So maybe it didn't hurt me as much on the sales side, but on a marketing publicity end, the consumer facing side, I definitely felt like fewer people knew about the title. I basically had less runway than most of the other 2018 debuts. Most of them had a year of runway before my runway started, because I sold in 2017 and was published a year later, and most of my fellow 2018 debuts sold a full year before me. And it can make a difference kind of on that marketing and publicity buzz end, the organic kind even, not even necessarily the kind that your publisher does. And I'm definitely feeling a lot more space and breathing room on the Ivies, which has a much more kind of longer natural cycle. And my book too had a very long natural cycle because I needed an extension. But the Ivies definitely, I'm definitely feeling a difference. I can tell that marketing, publicity, and sales have had the breathing room that I hope has payoff. It makes a difference. That's the thing. If you want to be traditionally published, you just accept that things take a long time and you lean into the positives. I really like that 8 million people have read my book, and somehow inevitably, I'm sure there will be some stupid error that's gonna haunt me until the end of time. There's already some little things that it's a little too late to change, but that's a whole other conversation. Maybe we'll do like a confessions about like things from my books that I wish I could change, but I also like, and you will learn to like and lean into, the nice thing about this long lead time, the readers are accustomed to it. They're accustomed to a year between books or more. I mean, more is better. So you don't have to rush yourself and have very fast kind of timelines for yourself. You then will have more time to breathe and work on the next book. The timelines are still relatively tight in TradPub for writing a book, but like you might have 6 to 9 months to write something, rather than feeling like you have to publish 3 or 4 books a year if you're in self-publishing, or even just in an arm of TradPub that does do tighter. I have had friends who are on 9-month pub schedules. Those do exist every so often in traditional publishing, and it just looked like murder from the outside, I'll tell you. I couldn't write that fast. So I like kind of that time and that breathing room. The only, I will say a negative of it, other than just like bottling up your anticipation, which can contribute to certain things I don't like about debut and buzz culture that I've talked about before, but also like the weirdest phenomenon. This is just so common and you just get used to it. By the time your book comes out, 90% of the time you have completely moved on, both like emotionally and in terms of what occupies your headspace. So meaning now people are excited about the Ivies and are asking me about the Ivies, and I am knee deep in a totally different book that I'm really vibing with, and I'm like, oh, I don't have a problem talking about the Ivies, don't get me wrong. I'm very excited for the Ivies, but I'm also like, but my new book though, like if only I could talk about the new book, like, So it's this weird cognitive dissonance that like it comes time to like heavily promote a book that you basically finished 2 years ago. And you just kind of tilt your head and go, huh, this industry is very weird. But that is why everything takes so long in publishing. Let me know down below in the comments if you have any questions, and give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and I will make more of these kind of like publishing why type videos. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and happy writing.